And that's the part I'm actually interested in this week. And so I prepared some things for you that are related to the first couple paragraphs of Parshat Vayakel. If you have the Plow Torah, it's page 612. If you have Eitz Chaim, page 552. If you have Ashkenazi Weiss, which is the women's Torah, is 523. So I'm going to grab the Plout first. Does anybody have the Plout there?
Excuse me, could you just please do chapter and verse?
Pardon me?
Please, I don't know. We always do chapter and
Good, much better.
because I don't know which one I have. I think it's the
Understood, and it doesn't matter which one, actually.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Pikude, no, Vayakel, chapter Exodus, the book of Exodus, towards the end, chapter 35, verses 1 through 16 is where we're going to start, and we're going to narrow in on part of it.
All right, thank you.
So, as you remember from last week, we were working on the building of the Mishkan, and people got distracted and built the golden calf. Moses got very angry. The rays of lights came bursting out of his head, which was the power of God or the fear of God or who knows what. And now we are in Vayakel, which is focusing on the building of the sanctuary. And it starts, though, with something interesting. Would somebody read chapter 35, 1 through 3 first? Volunteer? Merle? Natalie? Unmute yourself, please.
Okay. Moses then convoked the whole Israel community and said to them, "These are the things that the Lord has commanded you to do. On 6 days work may be done, but on the 7th day you shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on it shall be put to death. You shall kindle no fire throughout your settlements on the Sabbath day."
So that's pretty clear, right? However, let's go through it closely. In the first verse, Vayakel Moshe et kol adat b'nei Yisrael. So that's an interesting phrase, and it's not used all the time. Kol adat b'nei Yisrael is used in this Torah portion quite frequently. It means every single person was there, which includes the women and children. So everybody in the whole community heard this message. That is the message here, directing them regarding Shabbat. Kol adat b'nei Yisrael. And it then begins with the things you're commanded to do. What are we supposed to do on Shabbat?
Rest.
Rest. And Mara and Harvey, I see your hand is raised.
Well, I was going to say that even more than rest, it's we shall not do. And I find that interesting in terms of the next verse, which my translation says 6 days shall work be done, but on the seventh day there shall be to you a holy day. So we're also commanded to work.
Yes, we're commanded to work and contribute and make the world a better place, make our homes, make our families. So we actually have to do malacha, which is work, physical work. But on the seventh day, al ta'aseh malacha, don't do that same malacha. Don't do that kind of work. So it's an interesting definition on what is work. And it's written in the positive, right? 6 days work shall be done. And that is on the seventh day, you shall have rest, all in the positive in terms of the language. But then we get to the interesting part. You shall kindle no fire throughout your settlements. Now, if you have the Plout Torah, please turn to page 621. Anybody have the Plout and see in the middle of the page, they're going to go, the commentator's going to go through the reasons for the prohibition of kindling fire. Any volunteer to read that? Or does anybody have it in the Eitz Chaim? If you have the Eitz Chaim, it's on page 553. No?
Well, I can read the Eitz Chaim.
Great, please.
Which one is it at the very bottom of the page? The
On
Halakha Lam
yes,
Aseh,
exactly. In that box.
lighting, extinguishing, or transferring a fire on Shabbat is forbidden under Jewish law. Some scholars liken electricity to fire, therefore prohibiting turning on or off all electrical devices on Shabbat. Others in the conservative movement maintain that electricity is not fire, according to either science or Jewish law, and that it does not violate the prohibition of building on Shabbat, either for the electrician who installed the switch or is the one who built it. They therefore permit switching on and off a light, likening it to the permitted action of tying a temporary knot. Nevertheless, activities prohibited on other grounds, such as shaving, cooking, and doing laundry, remain prohibited even if done electrically.
So you're laughing, and I'm curious, why are you laughing?
Well, shaving, cooking, and doing laundry, they're prohibited even if they're done electrically. I mean, it seems like there's a bit of I don't know how many angels can sit on the head of a pin type of reasoning going on here.
Well, that is the kind of reasoning we got. Great, thank you. Howard, I see your hand.
Since we know that now science has learned that the way that nerves transmit information is through electrical and chemical, but also electrical impulses. That means that we're not allowed to think on Shabbat.
We're not allowed to what?
Think.
We have to just God.
We're not allowed to think because we're using electrical impulses, turning them on and off. We should anesthetize ourselves just before Shabbat starts and be completely unconscious for the entire period.
So you're pointing up something which is a kind of learning that the rabbis didn't have, right?
Correct.
The time that they were creating the Mishnah,
Amazing.
response to the Torah, that was the 2nd through the 6th century, they didn't understand that there are electrical impulses in the brain that actually work every time the synapses connect and do their thing. And I'm not a doctor. If I said it wrong, I'm very sorry. But the understanding is there is this electrical impulse in the brain, and that happens involuntarily. So what they're talking about here, and it's interesting that they make it very specific because the conservative movement is commenting on first the Torah, secondly, lots of commentators and halakha in between, and the conservative movement commentary is in the 20th century. Now, I do want to back up a bit, and if anybody has the Plout on page 621, Marv and Hara, and your hand is up. Mara or Harv?
I think Ray's hand was up before mine, though.
Okay.
This is Ray speaking. You go on ahead, because I also didn't want to railroad the rabbis going on to Plout, because I think she's on to a point that supersedes where I'm headed.
Okay.
Okay, well then what I was going to say is I have read that the some rabbis indicate that on Shabbat, in terms of rest, of not working, that one is only speaking about the intentional. So to address Howard's point, what you're saying, Howard, would to me be unintentional. We don't sit and actually decide to use our synapses.
Interesting.
Very nice.
Okay. Ray, I saw your hand, and then Natalie. Ray?
Thank you. And Mara, actually, there's an interesting overlap between one of my points. I wanted to make an observation followed by a question. But yeah, I think intentionality is certainly how I engage with this prohibition. And your point that the intentionality of using electricity is arguably distinct from the non-intentional and in fact uncontrollable electricity within our biologies. That certainly is meaningful to me. I will share my own experience as a liberal Jew encountering this halakha. What I choose to do, which does not precisely align with any halakha that I'm familiar with besides our riffing on it and my riffing on it, is around intentionality. And my observance that I choose for myself is not to do work activities which in my mind and experience I experience and associate as work. So I do refrain, obviously with the exception of this Chevra Torah on Zoom, I do refrain from computer use because that associates in my mind with my work during the week. But I have no complaint about using fire on my gas stove because cooking does not associate with what I think of as the work during the week, and I find it pleasurable. And similar for writing longhand, I find that pleasurable and contemplative. So that is my own personal evolved halakha, which has no basis in any text that I know of. My question.
Thank you. And I think it's very interesting the way you really have interpreted 6 days work shall be done. So your malacha involves computers. You don't want to do that on Shabbat usually, but you want rest, which is a rest from your regular work, so you can enjoy other things, even if it does not align with halakha.
That is a perfect paraphrase, yes.
Great. I see David Caden, your hand is up.
Yes. Well, since the words of the parsha, a complete rest dedicated to the eternal one. So that shows that the purpose of it was the rest, not just to sleep or be unconscious or drink ourselves into a stupor, but complete rest rest that is dedicated to the Eternal One. So I think that if one was to follow the letter of the Torah and the intention of the Torah, the rest would be not to do anything that was not dedicated or mindful to God or to the Torah. And so and we can all interpret it a certain way. And I certainly appreciate Ray, and I certainly am not such an observant Jew that I don't do all these things or I do all the other things. But isn't the intention the rest and the work is not doing activities, whether or not it's work itself, but activities that are not dedicated to God?
Or activity that is different from your malacha during the week. So I want to read something that I found in Plowton. I don't know if you all have it, but I'm going to go for it because it's interesting, and it's about fire. You shall kindle no fire on that day. And Plout says the reasons for not kindling a fire are not clear. It's doubtful that it was done to prevent onerous labor. For the rubbing of sticks together for the making of fire could hardly classify as labor in the way the word was understood at that point. Perhaps it related to the connection that the divine presence was believed to have had with fire, and on Sabbaths and festival days, God was honored with fire in the Mishkan and later in the temple. We may therefore hear an early attempt to centralize worship to some degree. And this one can understand, as the rabbis did, the prohibition of fire to apply only throughout your private settlements and not necessarily in the sanctuary, because we always, even to this day, have the eternal light, which is fire. But it's going all the time and has to be fed. But then Plout goes on. The prohibition is differently explained by those who attempt the Canaanite hypotheses, which suggests that Moses's religion had a special relationship to a tribe of blacksmiths called Kenites. Fire was prominently used in their work, and therefore prohibition to work on the Sabbath would have been highlighted by a special notation not to kindle fire on that day. So Plout is connecting it to fire in the ancient world and how fire was proscribed for certain kind of things, even in the temple, but only for sacred things. But he goes on, in the development of Jewish law, the use of fire that had been kindled before the Sabbath was allowed to a limited degree on the Sabbath day. And cooking was permitted on holy days if they didn't fall on the Sabbath. So you can cook on Pesach if it's not on Shabbat. In modern times, smoking often became a visible distinction between traditional Jews and others who, like Reform Jews, no longer felt the Sabbath laws to be applicable. Contemporary halakha rules that lighting via electricity is included in the intent of the biblical prohibition. So there's controversy as to what light is and what light was. I have one more. Anybody have the Women's Torah? They also so the aspects of fire are the pieces that the rabbis have said is forbidden, but then they went on to say, what is work? And if you look at the screen, I've collected what the 2nd century rabbis, the rabbis who compiled the Mishnah, defined or tried to define as work. So somebody read from the screen, please. Okay, Mara, your hand's up.
See it.
Oh, my hand wasn't up.
Oh,
Wasn't
okay.
up to read, though. I just wanted to make a brief comment that in terms of fire, that I wonder if the entire prohibition isn't connected to the very beginning of Genesis, because there is darkness and then God creates light. And if we are to behave in the image of God and God rests on the seventh day, then it would be appropriate that we would not create light on the seventh day either.
Good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
Uh,
David, I
al-
see your hands, and then I'm going to go to the text. David,
beginning with although or second century.
a second century.
Second century Common Era, rabbis who compiled the Mishnah extend this text to define rest. They list the kinds of work are forbidden on Shabbat. No sowing, plowing, reaping, binding, sifting, kneading, baking, shearing wool, washing wool, beating wool, dyeing wool, spinning, weaving, making 2 loops for sewing, weaving 2 threads, tying a knot, loosening a knot, sewing 2 stitches, hunting a deer, slaughtering a deer, salting a deer, cutting up a deer, writing 2 letters, erasing 2 letters, building, extinguishing, striking a hammer, carrying things from one domain to another.
So I don't know if you have seen all of these together, probably somewhere in your life before, but there anything that is involved building
Yeah.
or creating for the future.
Yeah.
So, sowing, putting the seeds in the ground, reaping, taking the benefit of that. Other comments on this listing of the Mishnah. David?
Yes. May I posit that this is akin to the laws of kashrut in the sense of, for many years until I began Torah study, I always thought kashrut was for health reasons and the Jews were ahead of their time, et cetera, et cetera. Later in Torah study, I learned that the reason for kashrut, it's not for health reasons, although that may be secondary, but God ordained that. That is what we are supposed to do because there's inconsistencies in what we can eat and what's not eat. Some things we can eat are not healthy, etc. So because God ordained this, and I don't know if ordained is the right word, but ordered kashrut, then we're supposed to do it. So therefore, with the fire, we're making explanations for it, which that's what Torah study does. But maybe it's that God said no fire on Shabbat, and then therefore that's what we are supposed to follow, and the other prohibitions as well.
So it's very theological. Do this because God said, and that is the framework of our Orthodox constituency. Our siblings that are Orthodox are saying, we observe Kashrut, we observe Shabbat, we observe Pesach because God demanded it. Those of us who might be more liberal, conservative, secular, say, I observe Shabbat because it has meaning for me, or it has a cultural framework. Mordecai Kaplan, the Reconstructionist thinker, basically said there are cultural things that bind Jews that aren't necessarily religious. Brad, I see your hand.
I'm going to write something too here.
Rabbi, can we spend a minute on the putting to death part?
Oh, that's what I was going to say.
As reform Jews, thank you, Natalie.
That was my hand up.
how are we supposed to deal with this?
Was exactly.
Well, we're getting there. We're getting there. And that's where the whole lesson is going. I want to take it down a bit, though, and have you read a bit of the Mishnah. Eric, I see your hand, and then I'm going to ask you to read the Mishnah on the screen.
I mean, the tailor may not go out with his needle adjacent to nightfall on Shabbat Eve, lest he forget that he is carrying the needle and go out with the public domain even after Shabbat begins. Any similarity?
Okay, stop.
I'm resting my voice, thank God. I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
The autistic community needs a timeout to reduce the stress of excessive stimulation. So the meltdown too is caused by extreme sensory overload. So the autistic community person must have a time to recharge, which is like the special interest, which recharges his battery so it can continue working and existing.
Thank you. And I think the autistic community is not the only one. It has been studied in the last few years that adolescents who have much too much time on computers and cell phones and all this are overstimulated, and that slows down a certain brain development, which is that of creating friendships, of feeling confident, of going out and trying things, even riding their bike around the block by themselves without a mom or dad with them. Parents are often today letting their kids be on the screen and not supervising, but not letting them ride around the block. For more reference, read Jonathan Chait. But now I want to go to the Mishnah, because this Mishnah is sort of an interesting thing. And I think the specificity of it tells us about the rabbi's thinking. So the tailor can't go out with his needle near the beginning of Shabbat, lest he forget that he's carrying that needle, and somebody might see he's carrying the needle that he uses to do business with, his tailoring. So there's an aspect of Marit Ayin of what does it look like? If the tailor's carrying his needle on Shabbat, it looks like he's working. So we don't want to have that happen either. What is the perception of work? And similarly, the scribe may not go about with his pen in his hand. And they might think he's writing something on Shabbat, and that's his work. So no, he can't bring that with them. And if you shake your clothes, which is understood in the rabbinic world as a type of laundering, you're shaking the dust and the bugs and the things out. If you shake them to get rid of the lice, somebody might think you're doing laundry on Shabbat. But there's an interesting little exception in this. And one may not read a book by candlelight during Shabbat, so that he will not come to adjust the wick of the lamp. However, in truth, they said, an established halacha, the attendant, somebody who works for the family, sees where in the book the children under his supervision are reading the Torah, even by candlelight on Shabbat, that is okay. Because they're doing it l'shem hinuch, for the purpose of education. So there's a loophole. If a child, and this I imagine would be somebody under 13, is reading Torah by the light of the candle, and the light is wick, kind of somebody who works for the family can twist that candle so it's lit, and that's okay, so the kids can keep reading. Now, that might have been done as a parenting statement. What are we going to do with these kids on Shabbat if they aren't reading? Or we want to really encourage reading and education and the joy that the kids are having reading together with their family on Shabbat. So I think that's sort of an interesting exception. Let's read one more. Somebody want to read Mishnah 2:8?
I'll do it.
Yeah.
Beit Shammai says one may not give skins to a Gentile tanner, nor clothes to a Gentile launderer, unless there is sufficient time for work on them to be completed while it is still day, before Shabbat begins. And in all of them, Beit Hillel permit doing so with the sun, that is, as long as the sun is shining on Friday.
So what is this saying? So you can't give your laundry to the laundromat until, unless it's time, you gave it to them on Friday morning so they could finish it by Friday before sunset. But if the non-Jew would have to do your laundry on Shabbat, it's saying here you can't have them do it, which is an interesting thing. It's you and the people who work for you also need to be able to observe Shabbat. And Hillel says, well, let's extend it a little bit. Let's go actually till exactly when the sun sets. So they can work till exactly when the sun sets, not 20 minutes before when we traditionally light Shabbat candles. So Hillel here is being a little more liberal than Beit Shammai. Any thoughts about these Mishnahs? Do they speak to you? Does it help you understand what's going on in terms of Shabbat practice? And if not, we're going to go to the 20th century, okay? So the observance of Shabbat was really based on the law we found in the Torah and a few others where Shabbat law appears, which includes the Ten Commandments, which includes some of the texts we read last week in Kitisa. But here also, they are specifying. So we're sitting in our house and we're thinking, I've got this leftover dough. If I just, braid it up, can I throw it in the oven and make it into cupcakes for Shabbat? If we follow Shammai, they say, well, you can do it on the Friday up until candlelighting. And Hillel says, no, you can do it up until the time of the setting of the sun, but not after. But if you're sewing 2 stitches, it's okay, you can sew 1. Say the hem on your pant leg comes down. You could sew 1 stitch because that's just 1 stitch. But if you sew 2, that's considered real sewing and really fixing. The salting and the whole focus on the deer must only mean that there must have been deer in the rabbinic period that people had access to for food. And even though it's one of the animals that were allowed, they want to say you can't do it on Shabbat, even if you caught that deer. In the modern period, there's a shift. And most of you are familiar with Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. And he focuses not on the Sabbath of place and concrete things, but the notion of Shabbat as a palace in time. And he says that Sabbath is built of soul, of joy, and reticence. It's adjacent eternity. It's a sanctuary of time. So he is shifting the focus from this physical concept of Shabbat that we see in the Mishkan in Exodus. So I wanted to give you a couple things that were found in, that was in 1951. Heschel is a European who came to America, taught at the Jewish Theological Seminary until he had major disagreements, and then basically developed his own writing and thinking, and students, not a seminary, but people studied with him. In the Reform movement in 1996, the Reform movement has had its own prayer books since the mid-19th century. But in a revision of the Reformed Prayer Book in 1996, there's this statement about Shabbat. And I'd like if somebody could read this, please. Okay, I'll read it. And you can discuss with me, okay? The mitzvah of Shabbat observance. It's a mitzvah for every Jew, single or married, young or old, to observe Shabbat. The unique status of Shabbat is demonstrated by its being the only one of the holy days mentioned in the Ten Commandments. Shabbat observance involves both positive and negative mitzvot, doing and refraining from doing. The mitzvah of joy. It's a mitzvah to take delight in Shabbat observance. As Isaiah said, you shall call Shabbat a delight. Oneg implies celebration and relaxation, sharing time with loved ones, enjoying the beauty of nature, eating a leisurely meal, being with friends, taking a walk, reading and listening to music. The mitzvah of sanctification. It's a mitzvah to hallow, to make Shabbat special, holy, by setting apart from the other days. It must be distinguished from the other days so that ones who observe it may be transformed. The mitzvah of rest. It's a mitzvah to rest on Shabbat. However, Shabbat rest implies much more than refraining from work. The concept of Shabbat rest includes both physical relaxation and tranquility of mind and spirit. On Shabbat, one deliberately turns away from the weekday pressures and activities. The mitzvah of refraining from work. It's a mitzvah to refrain from work on Shabbat. Abstinence from work is a major expression of Shabbat observance. However, it is no simple manner to define work today. Certain activities, some do to earn a living, others do for relaxation or to express their creativity. Clearly, though, one should avoid one's normal occupation or profession on Shabbat whenever possible and engage only in those type of activities that enhance joy and rest and holiness. So, thoughts. Do you resonate to this more than the
Here.
biblical or rabbinic? What speaks to you? Natalie, is your hand up?
Well, it was before, and also Brad. We're both disturbed by the part of what we started with, that you will be put to death if you don't follow these rules. And this is fine, because how do you expect people to believe in all of this unless there's some fear? And I truly believe that extreme Orthodox people are in fear all of the time that they have to follow all these rules or something terrible is going to happen to them. So
interesting. And the question is, how do you educate?
yes, how do you make anyone believe you when you have your own children and they go to the stove where there's a fire? You say to them, don't you go to that fire. And they go to the fire. How are you going to prevent them from doing it again? They have to be afraid that you're going to not love them as much, whatever it is. Fear is a great thing that's used to make people believe. And that is why our religion and this book, which is the most incredible thing, I always think, that was written 3,000 years ago. It's really unbelievable what's in here. But you see,
So
Jesus says, I love you. That's all you have to do is
Yes.
believe in me and I love you. And you can see that all this fear and all these rules, I would like to talk about that, has prevented a lot of people from continuing on.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. And so the question is, how do people learn? Do they learn through fear or do they learn through positive experience? I'm not asking you, I'm doing it as a general question. Thank you, Natalie. I'm
Right.
going to go on to somebody else. One of the things is fear the way that people learn, or is fear a primitive way that people learn? Kids come, they put their hand on the stove, their hand is going to burn. That's the experience. I don't want to get in the way as a parent. I don't want them to fear me. I want them to say, my mother knows how to keep me safe, or she's doing the best she can. And God is saying, there's certain things I'm trying to teach the people, and we're going to give it. Now, I think we have seen through people's leaving the Orthodox community that many people do not want to learn through fear. So I see somebody else's hand, Mara and Harv. Harv, please unmute.
Harv, I think death in this sense is getting kicked out of the community or a spiritual death. I think that's what it's talking about here, and not the physical death. I think that's the way
That's good.
the religion would look at it. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, but that's probably what I think.
Do you think it might be a spiritual death? That if they're not connected with Shabbat and with the community celebrating Shabbat, there is a lack of spiritual connection, of the spark of community, of the joy that they would not feel. And I would like to reinterpret that as spiritual death because, I'm not such an observant Shabbat observer. I observe Shabbat according to the way I perceive it as a Reformed Jew, but I certainly do not think if I drive on Shabbat that I'm going to be struck by lightning, or if I took electricity. I'm a committed Reformed Jew because I believe there are many ways to be celebrating. And I do like what's in the gates of prayer, that Shabbat observance involves joy, holiness, rest, and refraining from what is your work. I see, Brad, your hand is up.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if this wasn't a proto expression, first expression of workers' rights in some way, to have a 6-day work week.
Yes, it is. And people have understood it that way as a 6-day work week. And that's one of the contributions that Jews have made to humanity, that human beings are not expected to work 7 days a week. Not us, not the people who work in our homes, and not our animals. And so that sort of labor flavor is there. We care about the worker and we care about people in our homes. And it's a good message. I think the early Jewish labor movement used that as some of their thinking. Thank you. Rebecca?
As I've mentioned before in other classes or other Bible studies that we've been in together, is that I'm taking an emeritus course called Bible as Literature. Fantastic course. And in that class, we're just looking at the Bible as a piece of literature, and the Sabbath is very unique to Judaism. No other religion has a Sabbath.
Thank you. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd like to go on to this last piece from the 21st century. The Reform movement published another new prayer book in 2007. I actually was part of the teaching and learning that was part of it, so it was quite interesting. And at the point, Eric Yaffe was the head of the Reform movement. Would somebody like to read what he wrote here? Rebecca, can you see it? Unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, now I can. We're at
21st century.
21st century regarding the Reform Siddur, Mishkan Tifla.
Yeah.
Reform Jews are considering Shabbat because they need Shabbat. Rabbi Eric Yofi, CEO URJ, said, in our 24/7 culture, the boundary between work time and leisure time has been swept away, and the results are devastating. When work expands to fill all our evenings and weekends, everything suffers, including our health, he said. For our stressed out, sleep-deprived families, the Torah's mandate to rest looks relevant and sensible. We are asked to put aside those phones and stop gathering information, just as ancient Israelites stopped gathering wood. We are asked to stop running around long enough to see what God is doing.
Keep going.
Yofi acknowledged that most Reform Jews are not yet ready to embrace a Shabbat that is separate and distinct from the rest of the week. But our research indicates that we have more closet Shabbat observers than we realized, he said. A recent survey by the Research Network of Tallahassee, Florida, of more than 12,000 Reform Jews showed that 46% refrain from money-earning work on Shabbat, and 39% try to make Shabbat a special day.
So, any responses to this quote from, this is almost 20 years ago now, and I don't know what your Shabbat observance is, and how do you try to create something that you do that's positive to create Shabbat? And what do you do that you do to limit what you do to create Shabbat? So, Eric, I see your hand. Please.
I can't drive, so I use my computer and the television to tune into my synagogue's Shabbat evening service and the Mishkan. So that's I use my Sabbath to use my computer for different things.
And it connects.
You know what I mean? I'm a member of Central Synagogue, but I'm in Florida for the winter. So I was able to participate in the service, in the Mishkan service, using my computer. So I use my computer for information, and I use my computer for connections, because I don't drive and I'm stuck here because I don't have a car. So I use up my computer for social interaction and Shabbat things. So thank you very much.
Well, very nice to see you. Thank you. And I think many people do today. But in terms of one's personal Shabbat observance, sometimes when I taught Intro to Judaism, I would say to people, light Shabbat candles. I don't care where you are in the world, carry Shabbat candles with you and bring that light of Shabbat into your heart. Do something that's a positive tradition linked thing on Shabbat that connects your brain to the fact that you are doing something that is a Shabbat practice. And I think it's very interesting, and I hope you enjoyed looking at what the Mishnah says about the specifics of what it is that are limited behaviors for Shabbat. Any other thoughts about Shabbat practice, and where it comes from that somebody would like to share? Okay. So I just want to read one poem that's in the Women's Torah Commentary, and then we'll say Kaddish. It's called First a Spark by Sandy Eisenberg Sasso. She actually was the Reconstructionist, the first Reconstructionist woman rabbi. So it's taken as a riff of Exodus 35. First a spark, then candle glow. I watched you at sunset time, eyes sparkling in Shabbat light, circling above the flames. My hands pulled the warmth of Sabbath peace inside, praying for a good week and for blessing. Take time. The lights beckon for dreams and wonder, for the candles grow smaller and the children taller even as we pray. Hold this sunset moment and let it go into morning light. Another generation's candlesticks receive next generation's lights. And somewhere in the middle, we stand holding hands with yesterday and tomorrow, linking the echoes of ancient melodies with the breath of our children, finding God and hope in their embrace and renewing days of creation. In ordinary time, remember, first a spark and then candle glow. Really lovely. So I'm cognizant of the time.
Thank you, Rabbi. This was a very nice Torah study. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Glad you enjoyed it. So first I'm going to we still have so many people that are hostages. And so I will say the prayer for the hostages. Strengthen their spirit and bring them our prayers that they may be protected from harm. Implant understanding in the heart of the enemy that they may return the captives in wholeness of body and spirit. Grant wisdom to the Israel Defense Forces that they may secure freedom for the captives without loss of life. Grant strength of spirit and courage of heart to all the sons and daughters of Abraham and Sarah to release bonds of captivity and allow us all to live in freedom. They shall call upon me and I will answer them. I will be with them in their distress. I will rescue them and honor them. And together we say, Amen.
Amen.
So long. This is the Kaddish list for this Shabbat. Those who passed away during this past month are these. Please stand if you can. And we'll recite first the names of the people who passed away during this past 30 days, Shloshim. If you are saying Kaddish for somebody who died during this week, can you please say their name?
Rabbi, I'm going to momentarily interrupt. Will we manage Mishaberach today as well?
I say it again.
Will we manage Mishaberach today as well? I just wanted to interrupt.
Oh, we did it at the beginning.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I arrived late. My apology.
Okay, is there somebody you're thinking of?
Yes, Nopi Casanidis. So I will retroactively add her. Thank you, and my apology for not knowing that.
Okay, thank you. So the people that are in mourning or experiencing a yard type rites, if you're able, and I'm going to read the names first, and then we'll stand. Okay. So we recall those who died during this past 30 days: Marty Davidge, Arlene Gelfand, Herman Jacobs, Harry Croft, and Mark Slater. And we also recall those who died in the line of duty in America as well as in Israel. These are the yard sites that have occurred during this past week: Richard Barish, Vernon Lee Bell, Izzy Berman, Ida Bernfeld, Vera Barron, Sam Bluestone, Pablo Brenner, Eileen Broader, Julia Steve Brody, Paul Scott Cohen, Rose Cohn, Helen Waxler Coleman, Andy Dave, Chell James Dresser, Harriet Ellis, Munish Feinberg, Marty Feldman, Ray Fenton, Alan Friedman, John Jurdis, Douglas Gerson, Lillian Ginsburg, Philip Ginsburg, George Goldstein, Ronald Gordon, Steve Grad, Anna Greenberg, Dolores Grossbar, Ruth Grosser, Jay Haddad, Elizabeth Hoffman, Ambrose Holtzman, Beverly Jacobs, Rose Jaffe, who was the educator at the temple for many years, Sandy Jarkos, Sophie Jasny, Solomon Javerhi, Ruth Kalin, Stephen Karp, Miranda Decay, Lee Kamach, William J. Kend, Harry Kirschheimer, Anna Klein, Samuel Klein, Daniel Krasno, Ed Landa, Howard Landun, Saul Lieber, Jack Lipster, Yosef Mahabudia Far, Yagel Makover, Eliyahu Mani, Neil Markman, Joseph Moses Miller, Sylvia Morrison, Jerome Muchin, Joe Carroll Nadell, Lita Naim, Jonas Nazarian, Saul Newman, Bertha Nugent, Leonard Perlman, Harry Perlman, Myrtle Lorch Flaser, Allegra Pitson, Albert Platt, Simon Plattis, Michael Portis, Sanford Rieger, Ann Robinson, Esther Rosen, Helen Cohn Rosenblum, Aaron Roth, Fanny Rubenstein, John Rubin, Terry Sanders, Reva Sandler, Esther Schwede, Ruth Schwartz, Harry Shane, Norman Shapiro, Teresa Shapiro, Nora Morris Schub, Marion Smook, Greta Solomon, Ida Sosnow, Rosa B. Speed, Susan Sriri, Orlaya Martinez Tapia, Robert Tukin, Rosalie Turner, Norm Turtle, Marvin Twaddell, William Ure, Leah Valner, Stephen Weiss, Marguerite Sadok. We also recall those defending the state of Israel and no one to say Kaddish for them. Is anybody adding a name to the Kaddish list? If so, please do it now. Okay. We join together. Gadal, B'yit Kadash, Shemei Rabbah, B'yalma, Divra Kirte, B'yamlich Malchute, B'chayachon, B'yomechon, B'chaye Dechol B'Yit Israel, B'agalav Vizman Kariv V'imru, Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mivorach, Leolam, Lolmei Olmaya. Yiparach, Vishtabach, Vitpa'ar, Vitromam, Vitnase, Vitadar, Vitale, Vitalal, Shmedekucha, Rehu, Le'ela, Kol Birchata, Vishirata, Tushachata, Venechemata, Daviran, Bialma, Vimru, Amen. Eish Lama Rabba, Min Shemaya, V'chayim Aleinu, V'yal Kol Yisrael, Vimru, Amen. Oseh Shalom V'marma, V'hu Ya'aseh Shalom, Aleinu, V'yal Kol Yisrael, Vimru, Amen. May they be blessed and may we find peace in our world, our homes, and our hearts. And together we say, Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Have a good Shabbat. Nice to see you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. This was excellent.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you for leading this.
Good to see you all.
Good to
Good
see
seeing
you.
everybody.
Be well. Have a good Shabbat. I'm going to the CCAR conference in Chicago where it's very cold.
I'll be there for the Friends of the CCR, so I'll see you then.
Very nice. Great. Take good care.
Take care. Thank
Travel
you.
safe.
Safe trip.
Thank you. No snow.
No snow. All right, everybody. Be well. Helen, take good care.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this.
You too, Eric. Sei gesund. All well. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.